so pleased, though, that we can end this two-day festival with three wonderful people who have been great friends of the Journalism and AI project over the years and participants in it. So a really warm welcome, Sannuta Raghu from Scroll from India. Where are you, Sannuta, exactly?
I'm in Mumbai today.
Fantastic. How exciting. And Chris Moran, struggling through illness. I'm very pleased that you managed to turn up. Chris Moran, of course, head of all sorts of innovation at The Guardian newspaper, based in London, but of course now a global brand. And Ezra, you there, Ezra?
Ezra's just having some problems joining, but
He's just having some problems. Okay, we look forward to Ezra Eeman conquering the demons of technology. He obviously hasn't got an AI kind of feed there yet. Who will be joining us? Ezra is head of AI and that kind of stuff at the Dutch National Broadcasting System, NPO. So look, I'll start with you two wonderful people. Sannuta, can I start with you actually, because we're really proud of the global reach of this program. As you know, we've got Lakshmi Sivadas on our team based there in Bangalore, and we had dozens of Indians involved in our various programs this year, which has been fantastic. It seems, I know you've got your problems in India media-wise, but Scroll's doing a great job, and there's so much innovation going on out there. I wondered how people, and you in particular, in your organization, of course, what have you been doing in response to this incredible year, this 12 months, virtually to the day, isn't it, since ChatGPT was unleashed upon us by OpenAI. What have you been doing about it this year?
Sure. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for having me. I want to preface what is to follow with a small sort of introduction to Scroll. We are a small newsroom in India. We are under 20 journalists covering the entire country. And we are India's oldest digital news publisher, which essentially means that we're 10 years old, and that's how new independent digital news in India is. But what we're currently focusing on at Scroll is primarily generative AI, and we have 4 tools in various stages of development. We won the innovation grant late last year, to build a URL to MP4 tool, which could basically turn our news articles into, ready to use videos that could be posted all across social media. And the videos generated, we basically had a very credible report that said that, 650 million Indians in 2025 will watch 60 minutes a day of short videos. So that was crazy. And we wanted to reach that audience, get our journalism to that audience. So that's where this started. We're also building 2 LLM-based research tools to query and output in natural language. So one of them is based on our archives. The other one is based on, credible government sources. The government of India has really opened up, a lot of their data. The validity of it, we don't know yet, but we have sources of data from that. We're also looking at an autocorrect tool which basically will sit in our CMS and work off of our style guide. I've been building multiple My GPTs over the last 3 weeks, to understand the patterns in our headlines for our remote members, to query India's internet laws, to create multiple formats from one piece of text and things like that. And the previous session mentioned, cheap fakes, basically. So we are also experimenting with free off-the-shelf tools on like Chrome extensions, for example, image classifiers, which tell you very categorically that this was AI generated and this was, generated by whichever system that it came from. A big wire agency very recently published, an AI generated image for a very big story in India these last 2 weeks, and that made it to the newspapers the next morning, and it was quite a mess. So that's why we've decided to go just look around in that zone as well. So that's what we're up to.
So not much at all, really. I mean, just very, very quickly, how on earth are you doing all that with you have a huge impact proportionate to your editorial staffing, but how on earth are you able to cope with that amount of new activity this year?
Working many long hours, but it's
Right.
fun. It's fun. It's fun to have a driver's seat on this, whatever this mad thing is.
Yeah. Well, Chris, that kind of puts you to shame. Can you give me a list like that? I mean, I do know you've been busy. You can't tell us everything either. And there'll be things that have kind of disappeared, I'm guessing, as well. Things you played with and thought, oops, no, this is not the right time. But how have you been approaching this year of the generative AI?
Well, I think first of all, can I just apologise? I tested positive for COVID a few hours ago, so I'm very sorry.
We can't catch it. We can't catch it remotely, but
you can't catch it, which is good.
I'm
But I might be slower than I usually am. So no, I can't compete with that in some ways, but I think that's one of the interesting things about generative AI is if you have a newsroom of 20 people, you are going to look at it radically differently from a much bigger newsroom. So, and I think all of the work that I've seen in this area, which is positive, effective, and impactful, is deeply linked to the needs of the individual newsroom and their readers, right? So we are going fairly slowly. A lot of this work, the work this year has been at a kind of landscape level, understanding the impact of this technology in general for the news industry, thinking about misinformation, thinking about copyright, a huge amount of kind of regulation thinking about what's going to happen when if Google unleash SGE, their generative AI search solution, because that will be very big if that happens. So there's a lot of kind of broader landscape stuff that's been going on. But we have a very small but perfectly formed team, 2 engineers, 2 data scientists, me, a product manager. And we've been playing around with a few fundamental things. And we're kind of thinking at a general level more than anything else, right? So the first thing we built is what you might call a prompt management system. It's effectively a Chrome extension. It only works on live Guardian content, but it allows me to sculpt prompts, make sure they work properly for the Guardian, make sure, for example, if it's a headline generator, it actually does create a headline that looks like a Guardian's headline. And then I can hand it out in the newsroom to operational experts and start to get a sense, for example, of whether or not that's working. And the same is true of stand firsts and all of that kind of basic furniture stuff. And I think that's one thing that's really kind of landed with me over this year is even if you don't want to get into this area, more and more people are going to be using this themselves, right? In various different places. And it might be Google Docs, it might be Bing Chat. And your staff might be typing in, please write me a headline for this piece, and then pasting in copy into an open system, right? So you probably do want a prompt management system. You probably do want prompts that work very particularly for your organization. This same tool, I mean, it points at an article you're on, the URL of the article you're on, it examines it, it can strip out headlines that exist already to make sure that it's not, ingesting those and then spitting them back out again. And of course, you're also looking at different formats. So timelines, key points, key quotes, all of the kind of broad, we're going to start with our journalism and then see if there's something else we can do with it kind of approach. But we're also looking obviously at kind of support for production rather than just kind of trying to kind of automate these things. To be clear, the Guardian's never going to automate headlines, just to be absolutely clear. So there are other things you can do, right? It can identify the quotes in a piece and pull them out separately. And that could be quite useful. It can pull out, you can define facts to a certain extent, and it could pull those out to allow a sub to make sure that they've not missed anything that they should have checked. And the same is true in kind of terms of support for writers as well. I really like using these things as a kind of fake audience. I mentioned this before, but fundamentally, you've just written a science piece, you're an expert on science, can be quite easy to forget that, your piece could hit 2-3 million people, right, from The Guardian, right around the world of different kind of skills and various other things and education. So having something which says, I've just read this, I pretended to have the reading age of a 12-year-old, I found these things complicated, is a nice way of nudging that writer. It can be ignored, but also it's a lovely way of reminding them about the human beings at the end of this kind of funnel that they're working in. And the last thing, and this kind of is similar to what Sannuta was saying. I really like GPTs for documentation. I think they're really good at this, and I've got a managing editor in your pocket, which is the Guardian's editorial code. It's excellent. You do have to persuade the GPT not to answer questions like, is bacon nice? But once you've done some work around that and you've locked it down, it's incredibly good at synthesizing a code like that, where there might be quite different things in different places. And it's, you're never going to expect a journalist to pull that out every single day, right, and read all the way through it according to a certain situation. But if they've got it on their phone and they can just say, I'm reporting from a hospital today, is there anything I should bear in mind? It's amazing. It's really fantastic. So there's more, but those are kind of the big areas we're looking at.
Yeah, that'll do for now. And I think I like your point, Chris, about, I've been visiting loads of newsrooms, and oftentimes you're going to them where, perhaps understandably, the hierarchies where the managers have said, please avoid, just keep your hands off this until we know it's safe. And then, of course, you talk to individual people and say, yeah, well, I'm using it for coding, and I'm using it for building graphics, and yes, I'm using it to apply text for my social media videos and so on. And you kind of feel that they've got to have that conversation, because if it is working, then they should know about it. Ezra, thanks so much for joining us. You've had a particularly amazing year. Not just because of generative AI, but you've also changed jobs. You've shifted from media who's off to the Dutch public service broadcaster.
Yes.
But I do know you have been working at the same time. What's it been like? What have you been doing with generative AI this year?
Well, it's been a tremendous year, of course, to arrive in that position at the Dutch public broadcaster. And as you know, it's almost like a warehouse of broadcasters in the Netherlands, because there's like one umbrella organization, the NPO, and there's 13 broadcasters under it. So just arriving at it as the new director of strategy and innovation, I had to kind of figure out where we were already doing things with AI, how it was coordinated across, and the role that innovation could play across those 13 broadcasters, where there's different teams. We have, of course, a dedicated news broadcaster, NOS, and then we have journalistic teams and editorial teams in all of these broadcasters. There's a lot of things already happening, but what we really needed to find out is where we could better understand and explore it together, and also find kind of commonalities and scale in our approach. We have been doing quite a lot, actually. Not super coordinated yet, but we're kind of building to that. But I think in this phase, it's also about finding out what makes sense and what really adds value and what brings us closer to what we're trying to achieve. We're currently using what we were already doing was using AI for real-time subtitles across our programmation, and using Whisper for transcription of podcasts, like the low-hanging fruit, all these kind of things. But also recommendations in our VOD systems. These are kind of the very top of mind things when you think about a broadcaster. But we're also using AI on the back end. I'm talking for assisting with editing. So just going quicker through archives, spotting content, helping with metadata extraction, because metadata is really a pain, and AI can really help you to organize that better. We're currently prototyping tools as well to improvise or to improve storyboarding for TV shows and for documentaries as well, because there's a lot of pitching that happens centralized, and in order to visualize story ideas, the kind of new generative tools are really helpful to bring those stories more to life, and to give people ideas of how it will look. And then on the front end, I think we're a bit more careful in really putting it into production. There's more flowing through our innovation team, so that's more through the lens of innovation and exploration that we're trying to do things. We've been using AI to generate voices, and that's one thing that's been out there in podcasts. We've recently done a podcast on JFK, And it included a unique diary from a Dutch journalist that had a specific lead to one of the key witnesses. But unfortunately, that Dutch journalist wasn't there anymore. So we generated his voice to read his own diaries as part of the podcast. And that really, really works very well in terms of storytelling and in terms of bringing that narrative to life. We've been using generative AI to create images with podcasts as well for hearing impaired youngsters who could not really follow certain stories, and then generating images on top of a podcast is a way to kind of layer and make media more accessible. And that's a lens that we use often to see, like, can we bring stories that we bring for a general audience and translate that in a new format so it becomes more accessible. We also do that with our news stories. So we have a dedicated team that's called News in Easy Language, and they were doing that manually before, but of course we're now looking, can generative AI help us to directly spot the difficult words and find easy alternatives, or break things down, and that's currently a kind of assistive layer in the backend, but we're also trying to see if we can make that more an experience for users on the front end. We have
that's enough. That's enough. That's enough. My God, my God. I particularly love the disability thing. I've heard a few people talking about this, and it's something that I hadn't really thought through properly. But there's so many people that you can reach. I always think about translation in different languages, but of course it's people who have got either visual impairments or audio impairments as well, or other things. Just people who don't, perhaps they have kind of difficulty understanding complex language, etc., etc. I think that's a really interesting one, and it's so good to hear so many wonderful cases. I mean, it's funny. We did the survey, and there were lots of examples of people being very busy, strategizing and getting active and experimenting and starting to do things. But it is clear that there's a lot already happening. Although I do sort of think that 24 will be the kind of delivery year when this stuff really starts to, some of the wheat and chaff will sort out a little bit. But certainly people are going to start noticing other people are doing clever things and want to be copying them in that usual news media way. I want to sort of take a slightly more sort of, what's the word, critical note here as well, though, with you three, which is that, you're basically savvy people. You've been around, you've seen where tech has gone wrong as well as where it's gone right. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, from your perspectives, could be personal as well as from your institutions, where you think the risk is. Because in a way, it seems to me there are sort of multiple risks. There's kind of quite specific risks about things like standards, inaccuracies and so on. Then there's the kind of big risk around competition. Why should anybody come to us anymore if they can just go to Chat GPT? There's obviously the big disinfo thing, and then there's the big tech dependency thing that, we're going to be very reliant on some of this, and have we got control over the tools, all that stuff. And who knows, there may be other things that keep you up at night. If I could start with you, Sannuta, what do you think are the sort of the things that you are kind of wary of or worried about?
I think small news organizations around the world, I would say, are in a little bit of a catch-22, when it comes to AI, especially because, the promise is essentially that it levels the playing field for everybody, right? If the biggest news organization in India produces 5,000 articles a day, it gives me, a small newsroom, also the opportunity to do that. But for an organization like us, we are primarily built on trust. We have very niche audiences who come to us for our, reportage. So, and we've sort of committed publicly that we will have an editor in the loop anytime we're publishing, anything to do with AI. So, of course, there is the opportunity to publish 5,000 articles, but then, there's going to be that one editor looking at 5,000 articles, which is not humanly possible. So we would need, at scale, we would need people. So it's a little bit of I think we're wondering how to tackle that. Like the promise of volume and scale, like if we're able to today, publish like with one button in 22 different languages across India, it's like, that's the dream, right? But are we really able to do that without a person in the loop, an editor in the loop? So that's where we are at right now.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, as I keep saying, that I love the translation thing. It allows you to news gather more widely as well as to distribute more widely. But you make a really good point. What's the point of doing all that if you can't have a proper oversight over it? That's really excellent. Chris, what worries you apart from COVID? Sorry. Yeah.
I think one really interesting question for newsrooms is what's going to be commoditized. You know,
Right.
Translation, that's probably going to be solved at the browser level, right? It already kind of is. Text to speech, right? And it will probably be Google or Microsoft. You know what I mean? Like these. So one of the things I worry about slightly is building something that ultimately is probably doesn't necessarily require being native on your own site. Building a white elephant. I think there are interesting questions. One of the things we're doing at the moment is we are working with a company to fine tune a model and to just judge whether or not it's worthwhile. Like we don't really know actually. So we're looking at a very specific use case and we're kind of stepping through it all. And there's a lot of kind of effort to put in around evaluating it and various other things. So we're kind of getting used to that process just to answer the question, do we need to do this? But I think, what do I think? I think the biggest problem is the tech is just most effective for people who don't care about accuracy. And that comes back to these remarks as well. Is there scale here? Is there efficiency here? Or is it just a nice thing to prompt better headlines as opposed to, you know, just make it the art of headline writing an entirely robotic process? I keep coming back to something I did about 6-7 years ago called content reduction at The Guardian, where we started publishing less journalism. Right? And it was quite controversial at the time. Lots of people were like, why would you do that? But I do keep coming back to this with this kind of technology, and especially the reader facing stuff. I think it's really valuable to ask yourself, yes, okay, we can take this article and turn it into this article, but it's quite a good exercise to ask why you didn't create the second article in the first place. You know, abundance of journalism is not necessarily a common good, you know. So I think my eye is on that as well. Where do you deploy it in a really focused way? We don't just want to kind of create factories of slightly different content that could be rife with errors.
Yeah, that's right. Ezra, that's a really good point, isn't it? That, I mean, the last thing the world needs is actually more journalism as such. You know, we're struggling to cope with the amount we've already got with people avoiding news and so on. And Chris makes a good point, doesn't it? You know, that getting that balance between scale or volume or whatever and quality is really important. You seem to be doing so much, but where do you think the friction is? Do you think it's in that kind of implementation friction, or are there bigger doubts that you have around this?
So there's one thing. I also agree that I think scale will be a challenge rather than an opportunity. So how do you kind of stand out in that sea of, I call it middle gray, everything that's being churned out by AI models. But I think from our perspective, it's really trust and authenticity is what is the key to our public service media brand. And we already see that. So how do we implement AI for good and for public service? And how do we make sure that that doesn't lower trust and that doesn't get lost in the sea of noise? We already see, I think I read this week that a new research report that's saying that labels already lead to lower trust. So we're trying to do an effort by labeling that we're using AI, but that act itself is already lowering trust in what we do. So I would say that's the kind of balance that I see and the kind of challenge that I see from our perspective, as well as how do we make sure that the models we use are in line with our values, that there's not the black box and the bias and everything that we certainly are held accountable for.
Charlie, could I just say something about the labeling thing? Is so interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's also a reminder that it's been a year, so the technology is still really nascent. And I think right now, if you put a label on your content saying there has been some generative AI at work behind this, it probably is going to get the reaction, oh God, they're using generative AI. In a year's time, I suspect that label might be taken in a very different way and in a more reassuring way when more people are assuming that everybody is using it anyway behind the scenes, right?
Yeah,
so I think there's a lot to learn.
I think it's a good point. I think the research, if I'm right, the one that Ezra's referring to, it's kind of, it was quite right on that front. I suspect, my personal hunch is it's best to be a little bit more transparent now, if only to get your readers through the process of understanding, because obviously we used to use news agency copy, for example. We never told anybody. We used to use Google search. We never told anybody. But perhaps in this short term, it's quite good to explain it, perhaps in a positive way. I mean, I love the stuff, Ezra, you're talking about. If you're helping people with AI who have disabilities, for example, that's something to shout from the rooftops about. That's
but so I think it's more than just putting a label on there. It's explaining how you use AI and how it contributes to your mission, to your objectives, rather than just slapping that label on there, and then people have to guess what you have used and how you've used it, and if they should doubt your content from now on.
Yeah, exactly. We're running out of time, but I'm allowed to go over because it's my festival, and I'm enjoying talking to you three so much. But I just want to get a sense of, thinking ahead. The year is about to end, and then we're all going to be even more busy next year. So, first of all, good luck and good health for next year to you, all three of you. But what's your sense of next year? In the sense that, do you think, that in a sense we've had this year of hype and confusion, and perhaps it's going to calm down a bit, or is the pace going to continue? That in fact we're opening like Pandora boxes here, actually. Everything you said makes me think about another thing. And in that sense, just a little bit of advice out there, in a sentence, a little bit of advice to people who are struggling with all this right now. So 2024 predictions. Sannuta, do you want to sort of start?
Sure. I think, there's this big push for sort of owning your digital self. I'll speak about it from an Indian perspective. AI avatars are all the rage right now. Everybody wants to have an AI avatar. Every news organization wants to have an AI avatar. And, popular journalists are now sort of turning to avatarizing themselves, which essentially leads us to the domain of, how does, likeness rights work? How do, when can you deploy these avatars? When can you use my voice? Can you use it on branded content and things like that? So I think that conversation is going to start to happen because with very successful journalists sort of paving the way for this trend, everybody is going to be expected to say okay or have a say in having a digital self within the journalism space. So that conversation is definitely going to be had. And I think east of Europe, there's going to be a huge language push. I know all across South Asia, there's very good work. So like I said, we have 22 official languages. 3 of them help Pakistan, 1 of them helps Bangladesh, 1 of them helps Sri Lanka, another one helps Nepal. So South Asia is sort of taken care of by the work that is happening on languages in India. And of course, I know that, Korea is working. Thai is fairly good. In fact, Thai is better than Hindi, even though the number of speakers are, far fewer. So I think languages east of Europe is going to be sort of a huge push in 2024. And of course, people are going to talk about avatars, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I love the avatar thing. I think that's so right. And Ezra, your brilliant example of bringing a journalist's voice to bear is a sort of really positive way of thinking about it. Now, that's going to be absolutely fascinating. Chris, what about you next year?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to get quieter. It's going to get more and more of a soap opera as well. I mean, the stuff with OpenAI recently has been fascinating. I mean, what I hope one of the biggest developments will be is everybody in journalism gets better at interrogating who the people are working at these companies and why they're doing what they're doing, and thinking not about it as a kind of inevitable rolling, it's not the technology that is just self-manifesting, what are the decisions that are being made by these people, and what are their impacts, and why. I do think, I mean, it's been such a tough year on that front, and I do think journalists are getting better at it. I think there's been some increasingly good work around it. But I also don't want us all to get a bit dazzled by the kind of starry Dallas soap opera aspect of it. For us at The Guardian, my next step is we just pulled together a group of 15 experts within the newsroom in radically different roles. And I think my job now is we've gone through the hard work of trying to think about how we can use this stuff responsibly. We've tried to set that up really well and lay those good foundations. We've got a great little technical team who have grown knowledge over the last year. And now is the point where we actually go to those experts in the newsroom and say, is this helpful? And I think it's going to be fascinating, because I think for some of them, they probably won't find it helpful. Other things, I think quite pragmatic things, we will. But I think that's the bit for me this year, is actually firmly connecting it to clearly impactful stuff in the newsroom rather than maybe a nice to have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in a sense, it's sort of not 12 disciples, 15 disciples.
Yeah, it's about 15.
Yeah. Yeah. And for you, Ezra?
Well, I think the biggest revolution is yet to come, and it will mean that it comes here. It will be real-time and mobile. And that combination of being in the hands of everyone, being real-time, like real-time translation or real-time image generation, real-time video that's being avatared or whatever being changed in the hands of everyone, I think that will be quite the next shift. And how will that impact the whole landscape? I'm quite curious about that. So very much preparing for that as well.
No, I think you're so right, as usual. You know, often as an industry, we can get behind our own audiences on these things. You know, they were leaping onto social media before we knew it existed. And just by, you know, this is happening in universities as well, of course. You know, my students are all using these tools, but we still haven't got a entirely properly thought out policy about how we're going to do it in practice. You know, so in many ways, the world and real people are rushing ahead of us. Listen, you three, this absolutely fascinating and beautiful way to end 2 days of incredibly intense information and debate. Really lovely to hear your reflections, and so, you know, affirming to know that you are out there working in those newsrooms, doing such great work with all your colleagues. Please keep in touch, and you know, we will talk again and work again together, I hope, in 2024. So thank you very much, and get well soon, Chris. Okay.
Thank you. Absolutely. Bye.
Cheers. Take care.